and it says that it's recording in the top corner.
That's good, because I tell you what, last week was really interesting. We didn't notice that the record button went off, and somehow it did.
Well, I will try to keep remembering to look up and make sure it's recording. First of all, do you have any questions for either of us, either Dr. Tillman or for me, about anything that we've done so far? Okay. All right, then what I wanted to do first is, so that all of your papers will look alike, I thought I would just go over what we're expecting when we are going to be looking at your papers, when your OMA is due to turn it in. I went back to the APA guide that Howard University has online. And so this is pretty much the outline and the way to put it together. When it comes to page numbers and that kind of thing, you'll probably want to go back to the APA manual and actually look at that. But your title page is your first page. And each one of these starts on a new page. So it's not like you're trying to conserve paper, because nobody's going to print it. It's all online. So just make sure that you have your title page, and that's all that's on that page. And then your second page, whether you do an abstract or not, is up to you. But I do think that you need your school profile there. And it can be the one that you have used in the past. And then you can, if you want to use your school profile and then put a paragraph about what you may do that. Then I want your table of contents. I just called it contents page because that's what the Purdue University example had. So you're going to tell us what pages each one of these are beginning on. So that's what your table of contents is. It's basically the exact same things that I've got listed, but you put your page numbers by. Then for task 1, you don't have to spell out organizational management analysis, because that should be on your cover page, on your title page. But you will need to put contextual analysis. For task 2, you will need to put instructional capacity building. For task 3, you will need to put building a schedule. And for task 4, you will need to put reflection. And then since your task says 12 competencies, I just put a colon with 12 competencies. Then you will put your references. And remember, you're combining all of your references, and your references are in alphabetical order. So if you're having trouble figuring out whether something is in the correct order, please go back and look at what the APA manual says, because in a few places, about the 4th word in is out of order. So you need to really pay attention to that. And then following that is your appendices. You don't have to have appendices, but if you choose to have them, and they would go behind that. Now your appendix starts out with A as your first one, but you also need to label what those are and put a title with each one of your appendix. It doesn't just need to be shown there and then your narrative somewhere tells you what it is. It needs to be titled. The reason for that is your evaluator may be seeing your appendix after he's already read or she's already read your entire paper. So it needs to be very simple. It needs to be very clear. We're not trying to hide anything from these folks. You know, they're doing the best that they can with the rubric. So whatever you're trying to do is make sure that they can find the information just as easily as possible. So label each one of the appendix. Now, when you're doing the figures that go within each one of those tasks, look back to APAs to see how to label those as well. There is usually a title with each one of your figures or your charts or your graphs, and the numbering of them may be in line with which task you are on. So make sure you check AP8 when you are getting ready to put all of that in there. So hopefully this is just a little outline that will help you as you put your things together. If there's any blank pages, get rid of them. We don't need to see blank pages. Your evaluator doesn't have the time to think, okay, there's something else here, but I can't find it. So make sure that you turn in a fresh, clean looking paper. The other thing that you've got to be really careful about, remember he's allowed your Turnitin score to be up to 60. But my fear is that since we've copied so much from some other tasks, and I think this is Dr. Tillman's fear as well, that it is going to be pretty high. And so I'm hoping that the task 1, the task 3, and the task 4 will be new information so that it will not be something that Turnitin will pick up as being a repeat, or that someone else has copied something or something like that. So any questions about any of that information?
I have a question, Dr. Todd.
Yes, ma'am.
So you mentioned the Turnitin score. You guys are hoping that it's not going to be too high. Is this how you guys have done it in the past? And have you had issues in the past with scores being too high?
We have not had, I mean, I don't know. I have not taught this particular course recently. I taught it several years ago, but I have not taught it since they've been using Turnitin. I do know that if you turn in any section of it before you put the whole thing together, it's going to run the score up. So
Right, I understand that.
You only want to turn it in one time, and that's when you get the whole thing put together. But I only had 2 or 3 people in 601 that had any issues with it, and one of them somehow had turned it in to TaskStream before it came through Blackboard, and so therefore TaskStream checks it too. And so when it got to me, it said 100%. So there's 2 interpretations of that. I always look for the best interpretation, but one is somebody copied somebody else's paper. That's not the one you're looking for. My guess was that they had turned it in to TaskStream before Blackboard, and therefore the person who was doing the evaluating had checked it before it came through Blackboard. So, you know, if it's too high, I will send you a note and tell you what I think you need to do in order to try to get it down. But hopefully we're not going to have any issues with that. And I think that's also one of the reasons that I said there's a lot of information in this task that doesn't match what the rubric's looking for. So I think if you had so much information that's not connected to the actual rubric, that's going to run your score up higher. So hopefully we won't have any issues because you've got 2 tasks, well, 3 tasks that shouldn't have a lot of copied information.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Dr. Tillman?
Yeah, that's why for some people that have had a lot of copy, I have suggested that they go back and think about removing all of that description from the template, because some of them have copied almost the whole template in every paper. And by removing some of that template, you're cutting down the score. So if that's a way to sort of counterbalance.
And that's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions before we move on? All right, I just put some general observations that I have come across as I was working on tasks 2. And that was, many of you are including information that is more than is needed. But I'm not going to make you take it out. The only time I would do that is if I think that when we do the Turnitin, it's really sending the score up, and then I'll ask you to go back and look at it. Some of the sections are not real clear. Some of it's missing, some of it's too short. And the pieces that I find missing the most are special needs populations. And if you'll look back at that rubric, it specifically mentions these three things. And these are the three I'm finding missing the most. Special needs population, your formative assessment plan that's tied to the need that you identified for your school to work on to improve learning for your students, and the professional development plan that's tied back to what you identified your school needed to work on. So those are the three pieces that I found as I was looking at task 2. And unless something was turned in late, I have gotten all the task 2s finished. I've started on the task 3s. So those were just some general observations that I made. Those were the things that I commented on more than anything else. The other issues that I'm finding are formatting for your references, indentions for your paragraphs, and spacing throughout the paper. And I know that I'm saying that over and over and over. I'm saying it in your first version. I'm saying it in your revised version. And that also brings me, even if I have not gotten back to you and you've not heard from Dr. Tillman, don't turn in your revised one until you've heard from the two of us at least. Some of your peer reviewers may be running late, but you really need to make sure you've heard from Dr. Tillman and me before you turn in the one that you consider your final revision. And in some situations, I know that's not happening because I'm seeing the review one at the same time I'm seeing the actual task for evaluation. Not many are doing that, but occasionally I will see that. So just make sure that you have seen Dr. Tillman and my information and you've incorporated that. I do notice, like I said, for some reason when paragraph indentions are not consistent, when there's three spaces between subheadings and it's supposed to be a double space throughout the whole paper, it just comes out at me and I notice it. And so that's one of the things that I'm consistently having to remind people of. And then I'm seeing like figure 1.1 or figure 2.1, but there's not a title with it. Or the title may be on the previous page. And so try to get your title on the same page as your actual figure or chart. It may leave some extra space at the bottom, but that's okay. At least that way we can see it. And then, you know, when you combine your references, everything is to be alphabetized. So any questions about any of the things that I've observed? And Dr. Tillman, have you observed any other things that you consider over and over the same kinds of things you're seeing?
Well, I think from the beginning, we've been trying to get people to use the headings that we talked about. And there are a lot of papers I don't see that. And it's almost asking the evaluator to hunt and see if they can find what they're looking for. And that's not really the way it is. You're supposed to be presenting the information so the evaluator can find it based on the rubric. So you would expect, since the rubric is done in chronologic order of happening, that your paper would also appear in the same order as the rubric.
And subheadings to match the rubrics really going to help your evaluators.
Yeah.
Your evaluators, you know, between Dr. Tillman and I, we have 28 or 29 that we're reading, and you see how long it's taking us to read things. I can only read a certain number at a time without it getting to the point that my eyes are giving me trouble. So I have to get up and go away from it. And that's one of the reasons it's taking me as long to get through them. Now, I'm thinking that once I start on 3, when I started on task 3, those were moving faster. And I was able to follow the rubric. And so I feel sure I'll get caught up by the end of the week. And my goal is to have task 3 and task 4 read, the ones of you who have turned that in, so that you can start combining it and posting it. Now, one of the things I'm going to do is we will not have a Zoom class session next Tuesday night, because next week is week 6, and that is when you are supposed to have your whole thing put together. And I'm going to give you the extra time on Tuesday night to make sure you can work on that and get it finished. So you have a discussion board next week, and you have a couple of chapters to read. You also have your case study, your first one, to do. So instead of us doing a class Zoom session, you will do your group Zoom session, and you're to follow the directions with that case study. And if you have any questions about that, let me know, and I will go to that screen and we'll look at it together. But your group will need to do that case study next week. Now, each one of you, I can't remember, but I think it calls for a written reflection. But as a group, you do a presentation. As a group, you do a Zoom session discussing it. I only need the Zoom session and the presentation to be submitted by one person, but make sure you list everybody who participated, because I can take that and I can then go into another screen and give the whole group grades and credit for that. So if it calls for an individual reflection, which it often does, then each one of you will have to do that part. And I don't remember which one it's asking for, but if we have time at the end, we'll go back and I can pull that up and we'll look at it. So that will give you, if you wanted to do your group session on Tuesday night, like when we're having our class session, you can do that. My goal is to give you time to get your whole paper put together, and then you do have the Zoom for the case study. All right, any questions about that? Yes, ma'am, Carrie.
Not really about the case study, but about some of the screenshots and things that I put in my paper. I keep getting feedback about they're not big enough and they're too hard to be seen. I have tried every way I know to stretch those and pull those, and at some point it reaches distortion. So we go between, you know, expanding that to be bigger, but it also then distorts things. So I feel like that's also a thing where the person that's reading it can click that little plus sign on the screen and be able to see that.
And
So
you can't read it either, because you've got to then use your magnifying glass to read it in fine print. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm writing that line between getting it big enough for you, but not getting it so big that now it's blurred out. So that I'm trying, Dr. Todd and Dr. Tillman, to comply with your feedback, but it's also that dance between, you can only do so much before you've lost the integrity of the whole screenshot, if that makes sense.
Let me give you my perspective on that. If I can't read it, is it worth anything in your paper? If I can't tell what is on there, why did you put it in? Because it's not helping me see your whole perspective. And I know what you're trying to do with the screenshots. I know that. And I understand that. But at the same time, you have to realize your evaluators are going to have less time to look at it than we are. And if they're looking at this and they're thinking, I can't see any of this, I don't know why she put it in or why he put it in, then is it really important to go there? Or is there another way to put that information that's not a screenshot? And you lift pieces out instead of making it a screenshot. Now, that's the way I look at it. And, you know, like I said, I know what you're trying to do, and I know why you're doing what you're doing. But you've got to take yourself out of what you're doing and put yourself in the form of an evaluator and they're going through 120 of these that are coming in at the same time.
I understand that. Then my next comment to that is we're also supposed to be able to be showing evidence of the data that we have collected from websites or various places, so that the data that I'm putting into my paper is verified data. It's not dreamed up in Carrie's mind, and there are only so many places that I can pull that from. So I'm doing that dance between being able to provide you with the evidence and the factual evidence that what I'm putting into my paper is not bogus material, and also, do you see what I'm saying?
I do. But the question I would ask you is, could you lift out the information that's important?
Yes.
And then cite the reference.
Yes,
I could in your paper.
And I would second that, because so many students do that. They look at what is the important piece here, and they construct a table, or they construct a chart, or they construct a graph, and they put the information in it and create their information, title it, and put the reference under it as adopted from, and they give the information. And it's readable. It's obvious they understood the more complex looking piece because they pulled out the most important part. So that's what a lot of students do instead of that, Ms. Rupert. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but it's a difference between, I think when you get down and decide what is it that I really need to put on the paper, sometimes it isn't all the bells and whistles that you have at your command.
It's what goes with that particular part of the rubric. You know, that's what you're trying to show. So sometimes you may have more information, like I said, than what you're really needing to get your point across. Does that help any?
No, no. I should just say that I'm frustrated.
Okay.
Because the amount of time that goes into gathering all this information to make yet another chart is just like, you know, I'm just being honest, you know.
Well, and I appreciate that. But you know, my perspective is, if I can't really tell what's on that chart, then it's not telling me anything to verify what you've done. I would have to be able to get back to the original data to see what you're trying to show me. And so that's where it's frustrating for us. If we can't read it, we don't really know what it is you're trying to show us.
Yeah, one of the things that I am frustrated about is I will get one of those things and I'll try to enlarge it. And in order to enlarge it large enough to read it, it's so fuzzy I can't read it for that reason. Or you have cut things and overlaid so that there might be actually 3 graphs or charts, and they're all just right beside each other. So when you start pulling them apart, it's just a mess. And so that's what we're concerned about, because there are 9 papers, and there's about 260 of them that we're reading, and some of them you want us to read 2 and 3 times, and that's not considering the compile paper at the end. So, you know, and what she's saying is you're all going to dump all of those at the end, and you want the evaluator, this third party, to read those papers and get them done in like 2 or 3 days. And it's, you know, it's really an impossible task.
I think there's at least 4, maybe 5 different teachers of 603 this semester. So I'm thinking there's 8 to 9 actual sections. And so if you have an average of 15, you know, think about how many is going to be dumped in at one time that these people are going to have to look at. So that's why I keep saying make it as simple as possible for your evaluator to see. So that's where I'm looking at. I'm looking at down the road and what's going to happen when they're all dumped in at one time.
Let's see.
But I understand your frustration, and I don't have a solution for it, especially not at this point in time.
Right.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, I want us to look at some really important key terms, and then for the last 20 minutes, I want us to talk about the case study that I put on your syllabus or your agenda for tonight. But in the chapter you're reading this week, due process is mentioned. And so all of us hear due process, and we think we know what due process means. But I went to your textbook, and I pulled out from more than one place what they're talking about when they're talking about due process. It allows people who've been accused of breaking a law, been harmed by other individuals, or been accused of harming another person to bring their side of the issue before a court for a decision as to whether they must submit to the government or will be protected by the government. In schools, what that basically does, it requires you to provide the students and teachers with the due process before they can be deprived of any right. So the most commonly accepted elements of due process are proper notice of the charges and a fair and impartial hearing. Now, there's going to be several times as a school administrator you're going to be dealing with this. Short-term suspensions is one of them. Long-term suspensions and expulsions usually have to go to the superintendent for them to make those decisions, but the due process has to be there. For short-term suspensions, an oral or written notice of the charges against the student have to be given to the student. An explanation of the evidence the authorities have to support the charges, and the opportunity for the student to present his or her side of the problem. And that's where it's really important for you to learn to listen. What is it that this person is telling you on their side of the story? And then you have a reference to page 149 in your textbook that if you're looking at long-term suspensions or expulsions, there's more things that you have to do. And that's on page 149. And you can look at that at a later time. But all of those are some important points for you to look at. Now, is there a time that a principal would be dealing with this with teachers? Yes, the answer is yes. You as the principal or assistant principal, you're supervising teachers. And if they have done something wrong, guess what? You have to bring them in and deal with them just like you would a student who has broken a rule or done something wrong. And if it deals with the law and an actual law, not a policy, then you turn it over to the sheriff's department or the town police or whatever police it is that works directly with your school system. And you provide them the information and you let them do the investigation. You probably will have done a little bit of investigation to begin with to know that there's an issue, but then you turn it over to the appropriate law enforcement agency if it is something against the law. But you do have to tell someone what they're being charged with or what has been said that they're doing that's inappropriate and incorrect. So, you know, anytime you're dealing with student discipline, you've got a due process issue. You've also got due process that you have to deal with EC children. There is it's very clear in the information that is sent home to the parents about what they have to agree to, and that, you know, they have their set of things that have to be done for you to even test the children and to get them identified. So those are some times people have to really be aware of due process. Now, the next piece that I mentioned, which was corporal punishment, and I don't know that it is against the law in either North or South Carolina. It could be by now, but when this book was written, it wasn't. I put in there in my notes, I would not recommend it in this day and age. I never recommended it even when in the 80s when I was an assistant principal. It was being practiced, but I think any time that you use any type of punishment where you are touching a child in any fashion, I think you're putting your job on the line. And some parents will come to you and say, I want you to paddle them. Do not send them home. Well, part of that is they can't get off work and they don't have a babysitter and they don't have anywhere for the child to go. But just as sure as you do that, then what if you bruise them just a little bit? And what's going to cause that parent or keep them from turning against you? And so I just say, you know, I don't care whether it's legal or not. I do not recommend it because I think you're putting yourself in a very precarious situation. So the following factors are considered when you are thinking about force. And force is whether it's reasonable or not. You have to look at the age, gender, and condition of the child. You have to look at the nature of the offense or the conduct and the child's motives. And then you have to look at the influence of the student's example on other students and whether the force was reasonably necessary to compel obedience to a proper command, and whether the force was disproportionate to the offense, unnecessarily degrading, or likely to cause serious injury. So that's what the textbook says is when they're considering about the amount of force. Now, I will tell you that when they're little, basically, while it is not a smart move to do much picking up and carrying, I had a little girl that told me she was leaving campus. Now, she was 5 years old. No, she was 4. And she was just as adamant as could be. And her preschool teacher had done everything she knew to do. So she called the office and she said, Dr. Todd, will you go outside and meet her? I have had it and I don't know anything else to do. So I'm going to let her leave, but I want you to catch her. So that's exactly what I did. So she got me before the little girl left the room. So I was able to get out of the office, walk down the hall toward that direction, and hear this. And it was a campus plan. It was several different buildings. It wasn't just one building and halls. So here comes this little girl. And I look at her and I stop and talk to her and I bend down, I get on her level. And I said, where are you headed? I'm going home. And I said, I don't think you're going to go home. She said, yes, I am. I'm not staying here anymore. I'm going home. And I said, honey, I can't let you go home. I said, you're going to have to come with me to the office. I'm not going with you. And so at that point in time, remember, she's 4 years old. So I bent down and I picked her up, and I was carrying her with her facing me like you would a small child. Only she kicked me all the way to the office. So when I got to the office, my secretary saw me coming, so she ran out to the front door and opened the door of the office. And this little girl was just kicking me as hard as she could kick. And so the secretary had got a chair and I sat her down and I said, young lady, you're going to sit there until you can figure out how to behave in our school. She did. I don't know what made her change her mind, but she did. Now, if her parents had complained a lot, could I have gotten in trouble? I don't think so, because I was trying to keep her from getting onto the highway. And so it was for her safety that I was bringing her into the office. So there's a lot of common sense that goes into these situations. And too often, not a lot of people have common sense. But that's one of the pieces that you really have got to look at. You've got to look at the age of the child. You've got to look at whether or not they are doing something that they could get hurt. And so then you deal with them. So she still would not calm down and do what she was supposed to do, but she sat in my office for a good while. And so finally, about after lunch, we fed her. And so after lunch, she decided maybe she could go back to her classroom. by that point in time. But, you know, she was just determined. And you will find children like that. They are determined. And it's not always the younger ones. Sometimes they're older. And you have to figure out other ways of getting them there, and you wouldn't carry them. But this one I did. But it was for her safety, to keep her from getting in any trouble. So anyway, you will encounter a lot of situations, and some of them you'll look at and you'll say, oh my gosh, did that really happen? And yes, it did. And, you know, I can think back to a lot of things that happened to me, and I thought, I should have written a book. And I don't even remember all the incidents now, but some of them would have been so funny, it would have been real entertaining for somebody to read. But, you know, that's just the world we live in and have been living in for 20 to 25 years. Sometimes I think we think it's worse than it was. I don't really know that it is. All of these same issues were present years ago. Sometimes it's the common sense or lack thereof that blows things out of proportion. And that's why I have stressed that you really need to be calm anytime anything is going on that could be explosive around you. And you need to show the calm whether you are or not. There's a time and a place for you to deal with your feelings. But when you're in charge of the school and there's an incident happening, that's not when you worry about your feelings. You worry about everybody but you, and you just deal with it and you keep moving. And I'm not talking about physically moving. I'm talking you keep moving on whatever is coming your way, and you deal with it. And you remain just as calm as can be. And you don't let anybody know that you're upset. You just handle it. Otherwise, you will have more panic than you've got anything else. Now, the next thing that we're going to look at, and this is actually leading into the case study, is Chapter 5 deals with student rights. And one of the things that schools will argue about more time than I can imagine is dress codes. And I don't know the number of dress code issues that when I was the superintendent that my schools went through trying to define what it was appropriate to wear. And you have some teachers that are going to follow the policy, and you have some teachers going to ignore the policy. I didn't ignore the policy, but I didn't look at shirts to read what they said. You know, I was usually walking down the hall, and instead of looking at what they said, I look at the design. And it's what I would see would be the design, not the reading on it. And maybe something was inappropriate. I didn't see that. But another teacher may have seen it. So they may have come through my class or even been to the office when I was a principal. And I didn't notice that there was something inappropriate, but the teacher did. So the piece you have to remember is as long as you follow policy, whatever your county has decided that it is, then if somebody disagrees with it, you've got the policy to fall back on. But if you do your own thing and you don't follow policy, they can come after you rather than the policy. You always want to follow the law and the policy of your school system so that if there's an issue, it comes back on the school system and not on you as an individual. And then pages 130 to 136 talks about oral and written expression. And it says, you know, don't tolerate language that's lewd, indecent, or offensive. Work to balance the values of the community with any policies the school develops concerning its oral expression. Now, one of the things that I used to do years ago is, you know, my students I would say, you know, we can't talk like that at school. Well, I hear it all the time at home. I said, honey, I didn't say that you didn't. I said, what I said was we can't have it at school. Whatever your parents allow is at home, but at school, we can't allow that. It offends some people. So you have to figure out how not to put the child down for something that they live with on a daily basis, but at the same time, you can't allow it because when they go to work, it's not going to be allowed in professional settings at least, and in a lot of other settings where the supervisors can hear, it's not going to be allowed. So that's why you start out with a training them that sometimes things are appropriate for school, and you can have different standards at home, because we're not putting down what they're growing up with. We're just saying at school we can't do that. So that brings us, for us to look at for about 10 or 15 minutes, the case study that I want you to look at. This is a case study that was in one of the textbooks that you all have probably had already. But you're principal of a suburban high school with an enrollment of 1,300 students, and you're in grades 10 to 12. There's a dress code approved by the student council and a faculty advisory group. Now, the one piece missing here is the county policy. So it is saying basically this policy is a school policy. And that, if you are a charter school, you'd be okay with that. But if you are a part of a system, you would need to know what your county policy is. 4 students new to the school appear in your office one morning in September. They've been sent to the office by the homeroom teacher. 3 girls are dressed in long dresses and they're wearing burqas. The boy has a light beard just beginning to sprout and become dark, and he's got a cap on. Facial hair is not permitted in the school, and neither are hats during class time inside of a building. The students are unhappy about being sent to the office for their dress and appearance. They complain that the dress code is contrary to Muslim practice, and they are being subject to unfair discrimination. Well, you had received a phone call from a parent, and there was a note for you to call them back. And it was the parent of one of these students that's in your office now. So you now understand what that phone call is going to be about. So now you're sitting there with 4 very upset students, a dress code that your teachers and most of the students support, and you're facing a charge of religious intolerance. So what is it you do immediately? What's the first thing you do with these students?
I would first, I think I would start by letting them tell how they're feeling about it again, make sure they feel heard. And then this just happened recently at my school, elementary school. A teacher assistant asked a student who was wearing a burqa to take it off because she said it was a hood. And immediately the parents were also upset. But what we did was listen to the child, call the parents, and then they're allowed to have it on because it's a religious freedom. It's in the law.
That's
so and we found the part of the law that said that specifically, and then shot that out to all the teachers and the staff that said this is specifically the federal law that allows this. Do not ask children to, it's not dress code policy. It's the law.
That's right. And federal law usually takes precedence over state law. So a lot of the state laws are actually passed after the federal laws are passed, and they're trying to get the state law in compliance with the federal law. So if you get federal money, which almost every system does, because they can't afford not to have that federal money for the school lunch program and for the EC children and for the career and technical education programs. So you have to do what's all right. So immediately you're going to deal with the.
Today was Tuesday.
What?
Why?
No, I thought I was not the other way, but then I got home.
All right. Who's trying to talk to us?
I'm sorry. I was talking to my son. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. So you deal with the children or the students first, and then basically, are you going to let them go back to class?
I will allow them to go back to class until you find out more information, because then you're making them waste instructional time, and you don't, it's not like they hit somebody or was physically aggressive. It's just a thing.
Well, and then bottom line is, like Kara said, it is a law that they have to be allowed religious freedom with that. And so you're going to let them go back, but you're also going to let your teachers know that that is not something that they should be sending students to the office for. All right, the next question is, what would you do after the students leave the office?
Research.
Very good. And where are you going to go to look for that information?
District handbook, school handbook, DPI, federal laws, statutes.
Okay. You would start, you're exactly right. You would start first with your county policies. So you would go to wherever you have those records and you would look up the dress code policy. And then you would see what it had to say. And usually the policies, if they've been done by the school board attorneys, and a lot of times that's where a lot of the counties get their policies from, then it's going to have law references connected to it, which would take you to the federal laws. So once you do the research, you still haven't called this child's parent back. What are you going to do?
Well, you would need to call the parent to let them know about the situation, because the kid's going to go home and the parents need to hear it from the principal before they hear it from their own kids.
Well, and chances are they've already heard a version of it, because you wouldn't have had the phone call if they hadn't. So you need to have, you need to have talked to the student, you need to have your policy, and then you need to make sure that you follow up with the teacher to make sure the teacher knows that this has to be allowed. And then you would also make sure you didn't just follow up with that one teacher, but you would have to follow up with your staff and just remind them that when you have students from various religions, that you have to accommodate what is required for their religion when it comes to dress. And then you would call the parent back. And what are you going to tell the parent? You're first of all going to do what? You're going to
apologize.
No, you're going to listen to them first. And
no,
then, then you apologize. So you got to listen to them and see what it is they're going to tell you, because you may think you know, but it could be a little bit different. So you've got to listen to them and see what their actual complaint is. And that's where you really need to improve your listening skills. And sometimes the old repeating back to this, am I sure that, is this what you're wanting me to hear? But, repeat back what you have heard and make sure that's what they're really telling you. So you really put those listening skills to where it is, what they're talking about. And then we've also answered what type of research would you need to do and who would you need to consult. There's probably somebody at your central office that deals with the policies. So you're going to call them and talk with them about it. Your large systems probably have an assistant superintendent assigned to your group of schools. So you would probably want you as the principal would want to talk to that person and let them know what you're dealing with. One of the things that you need to remember is your central office is your helper. They are not someone that you're looking at as being in the way and doesn't allow you to do what you want to do. They're your helpers. They've got a lot more information than you have time to look for. And they can provide that information to you, and they may know exactly where to go to look for it. So don't ever try to get the idea that it's the school versus the central office. Y'all are in it together. They're your support system. They're the ones that are doing all of the grants to get you money for whatever problems there are at your school. And so I've seen too many principals that try to put their school versus the school system, and that just doesn't work. First of all, it eventually ticks off the people at the central office that are writing the grants to get you all money. It's just poor thought processes, because you're in it together. They're there with resources to help you and give you more information and guide you. Why look at them as somebody that's not there to help you? Yes, they're going to tell you when you've done something wrong, because that's their job. Many of those are the in-between between the state or the feds and your school. And if you've done something wrong, you need to fix it. You know, sometimes we can do things that are wrong. We don't even know we're doing it wrong, but they know, and they can tell you how to fix it, and you can get it fixed before it becomes an issue that parents are going to complain about. All right, then the last thing, as the administrator, if you determine that these students are practicing their faith with the clothing they're wearing and the hair and all that, what will you do regarding the policy, and how will that affect the rest of your school? Remember, it was approved by the student council and a faculty advisory group. So what is it you're going to have to do with the groups that have approved it?
You have to educate them on the same thing you learned about how it's, you know, within their rights to practice their religious beliefs with that burqa and whatever else, that, you know, the laws have to be revised, just like Wake County's doing, coming up with a new dress code policy to make it less sexist or something.
Okay. In all the years I was in education, I heard more fussing about the dress code policy, and I got to thinking, if they're not showing their whole body, is it really worth it? You know, as long as it's safety, you know, and they're covered and they're not harming anybody, and it's decent, you know, is it worth all the time and energy that you are spending in trying to come up with a dress code that everybody agrees to? That, yeah. You know, that is just an opinion from somebody who has heard it for over 25 years. So, you know, at some point in time, you have to look at, okay, what are we gaining from this? And while it will continue to be an issue as long as everybody has an opinion, I also have a firm belief.
New beast, though.
What?
I said high school is a brand new beast. I went in there. I'm just shocked, put it that way, with just some of the things I'm seeing. But anyway.
I'm not going to say I'm surprised. So yes, it is a whole different world. But, you know, you just have to figure out what is legal, what's needed for safety, and that needs to be your two priorities, legal and safety. And so once you keep those in mind, you can deal with almost any of the other things. So you're going to have to revise your policy pretty much. So you're going to have to get your groups, the student council and the faculty advisory group, you're going to have to get them together, and you're going to have to say, and maybe not at the same time, but you're going to have to say, you know, we're aware of some new legislation or new county policy, and we're going to have to revise our dress code. We're too stringent. We have to have some exceptions for religious freedom. And then you hope that they will agree with you. And if you approach it the right way, most of the time they will. Then you make the changes, you explain it to your whole faculty, and then you just keep moving on. And it's just one of those little things that takes more time than you want to think about, but you fix it and move on. And then the last thing that, and this is going back to what Sharon alluded to, while this example appears to be a real religious issue, with there being so many cults, religious factions that seem to be present in communities, including satanic cults, will you always recognize a real religious issue?
No.
I think there are sometimes you won't, because it may, instead of being a religious issue, you may recognize it as an inappropriate dress based on what the policy says. And you may not recognize it as a religious issue, and when they come to complain, it will hit you like, do what? Where did this come from? It doesn't even fit. But I think you have to be prepared for some of those kinds of things, because you're always going to have somebody who thinks they're smarter than you are. And some of them may be. You know, I had some that were smarter than I was. But you also, as long as you deal with the law and safety, you're going to be okay. The other thing that goes with that is, what type of research would you need to do in your community to determine what religious groups, whether they're recognized by the community or are small groups that do exist, and are they legitimate religious groups? So where are you going to go to find this information? Who are you going to consult?
I know at our central office, we have a designated person that deals a lot with the community.
Okay.
So that could be a possible or feasible point of contact.
Okay. That'd be a good place to start.
I would talk to parents, oftentimes like the PTSA board, or parents that come and volunteer that are in the community. Just talk to community members and stakeholders as well. I would talk to them and see if they're in the community, talk to them.
Okay, that's good. Some of the communities have a group of religious leaders. I don't know what they call themselves. Sometimes they're a religious council, and they have people from all denominations that meet together. That would be another group that you can consult. They're going to know the main ones, the main denominations, the main religions. But some of the cults, they might not even be aware of, but they might have heard some of their people who go to their churches talk about them. So they might have some information too. So they're a good group to consult. When would be the time that you would need to find this information out? When would you need to find this information out? And I'm thinking about, would you do it before school started? Would you do it when school is started? Would you do it when the issues arise? When's the best time to try to figure these things out?
I mean, I think it depends on when various people would be available.
Okay.
So whoever you need to call, if let's just say you call an imam to find out specifically what's required for religious dress, it depends on when the mosque is open. So I think it just depends on people's schedule. Sometimes people communicate via email, or just finding out what the best communication mode would be for those people, I think.
And that's a good place to actually talk to the leaders and find out what is appropriate and what they would expect to be part of appropriate dress for their parishioners. If you could do it before school started and before you had any issues, that would be the time to do it, because that way you're not backpedaling. You've thought about it up front and you've dealt with it prior to a situation coming up. All right. I did this one because this is something you're going to face. As a school administrator, you're going to face dress code issues. If not, it'll be one of the first times in school history that someone hasn't complained about dress code. So I wanted you to be thinking about it and not necessarily thinking about it from just your school perspective, but the whole perspective. And so that's the reason I put this in here. Plus, that was one of the topics that we were talking about in our chapter this week. So does anyone have any questions or anything that they want to ask before we end this session?
I don't have a question, Dr. Todd, but what you were saying about talking to your district leaders, I think that's real important, because we had a situation on Monday when I got to school. We had no power, and I thought school was just automatically going to be canceled, at least for the students. And in talking with my principal, he stated that he had direct contact with the district leaders and he had to have school. And of course, this had never happened, at least at school, my school. So he was on the phone consistently with them getting directives. You know, they were there to help.
Right.
And so I think a lot of times what you said about it being the district versus the school, I don't know how that comes up, but it does. But yeah, he really showed me how you keep contact with them and they will help you. And we had a situation where we had to hurry up and get the kids out of the cafeteria for the generator to come through. So it was quite interesting seeing all that in action and him working with the district leaders.
And I will tell you that as our buildings get older and the infrastructure gets older, you're going to have issues like that. That's going to happen all the time. And one of the issues that the central office in connection with your school will have to decide is it better to send the children home? Is there going to be anybody there to look after them? Or if it can be fixed relatively quickly with generators or something to get some power back running, are you better to keep them at school and be a little bit uncomfortable or send them home? Where's the least danger? And snow decisions like that are also one of the pieces. It starts snowing. Well, first of all, when that first flake falls, you can't let them go because your bus drivers aren't there. So you have to get your bus drivers there. Most of the time, if there's free and reduced, they need to eat. So you move up the eating schedule. So when it first starts, it's going to be 2 hours before you can get everybody there and get them moving. And if indeed the weather forecast, and you talk with someone at your central office and they've had contact with the people in the TV stations, and they have actually said, okay, this is coming through, it's going to be gone by 2 o'clock. You're usually better off to stay where you are than to put them out on the road when it's falling. Now, considering the fact that they're right 50% of the time, you will be too. So, you know, weather is just one you can't win. Somebody's going to be unhappy regardless of what you do, but it's just one of those things. You always look at the safety of the children. And for weather decisions, you're looking at the safety of the high school student who's driving to school. Because most of the time, your bus drivers are going to be able to handle those buses. But the children in the cars are the ones you worry about. So you don't want them on the road when it's going to be really bad. And that's one of the things. So I hope this has helped you see a little bit about all the things that you have to think about when you are a school administrator and how many things that can crop up when you least expect it. And, you know, that is just part of life. So in a school as an administrator. So I hope this has helped you. Remember, we will not have a Zoom session next week for the whole class. Use the time to do your case study discussion in your group, and then get your whole task put together. So hope you have a wonderful rest of the week and have a happy Valentine's Day on Thursday. And I hope your schools don't go as crazy on Valentine's Day as some of them do. But I've walked in elementary schools and seen 2 and 3 rows of flowers and teddy bears and stuff in the cafeteria because they wouldn't let them be sent to the classrooms because not everybody was getting one. And so they had to pick them up in the cafeteria. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't believe that this kind of stuff, so much went to schools, but it does. So good luck. So have a great day.